that introduction. And thank you all at Suquamish UCC for inviting me to speak today. And I also want to make sure I put my shout out to all the fathers who've, those in role or in spirit, are celebrating today as we honor you moving forward. Those are very important roles, and we want to make sure that we provide space for an honor for that. So getting in today, the title of my talk today is constantly transitioning. Obviously, you know, if you've read my bio or Googled me in any way, shape, or form, you'll see that I'm an openly trans person. So transition is you know, something that I'm very familiar with. However, I'm also in many ways very bad at it. And I say that because I am in constant resistance to change. So as 2020 came in, we all saw 2020 brought in some serious change. Overnight, the world changed. And it turns out that for many, including myself, we needed it to change, at least for the temporary part. I came to realize that I was just not in a great place personally, or not in a great place in my job. And not because I hate my job. I love my job. I'm still in the Navy. I'm still doing it. I love my job, but just in the way I was concentrating on my job being a big portion of my identity. And I've really spent the last year unpacking that. I realized I was bored, but I was also overwhelmed, if that makes sense. I was stuck in this place, both physically and mentally, that was both draining and exhausting. And 2020 bringing kind of everything to a stop, and even through a good portion of 2021, I really had to kind of force myself to re-examine where I was in life. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of a combination of both the 5 stages of grief, and it turns out that there are also 4 stages of transition. And I am pretty sure that over the last year, I have been through both of these processes, and I've been through both of them or at least the transition one 3 times. And it has been a roller coaster of a ride. So let's unpack some of that. And as we talk about the 5, you know, many times our 5 stages of grief, which are, you know, we associate with denial and anger and bargaining, depression and acceptance, those are really intertwined in many cases with the 4 stages of transition. And those are denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment. So the first thing that I did starting into 2020 was I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to school. What was I thinking? Yes, I decided that I needed to go back to school. You know, and so I was like, I need to figure out, part of it was finding that, realizing that at some point my job in the Navy was going to end. Whether that was going to be by choice or by force, I don't know, but eventually my job in the Navy is going to end. And as any good old sailor will tell you, the next question is, what do I want to do when I grow up? Right? Because the Navy is really good at letting you just kind of float along. As you move from one job to the next, you get a little bit more responsibility, but a lot of those decisions are made for you. They tell you what to wear, what to do, where to go, who you work for, who's your boss, what teams you're going to lead, and what regulations you need to follow to make that team work, and all this other stuff. Eventually that goes away. And so I realized that I needed to figure out what it was that I wanted to do when I what I want to do when the Navy finally decides to say, you know, thanks for your service, but we don't need you anymore. And so I said, okay, I have this MBA that I got in 2019 through Norwich, but is that what I want to do? And my bachelor's of biblical literature, well, yeah, that's okay. But, you know, is that what I want to do? And I didn't really know. So I started to do a few things. So I was like, yeah, no, I don't need to go back to school. No, total denial. Nope. This, you know, we're going to just see what goes. And then the resistance, oh, it's too expensive. Because I was like, no, I don't want to use that GI Bill because I don't know if that's really what I want to do. Nope, don't know if that's really what I want to do. But if I'm going to go back to school, I don't want to pay $80,000 to do that, right? Especially if I'm doing it part-time. So I went back and forth, and I have to keep reminding myself, whatever it is that I choose to do, this is all self-inflicted. So I can't complain about all of the extra time that it's going to take me to do this, because I'm choosing to move forward with this. And so I started to explore, which is the third stage of trying to transition of me into a new student again. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go after another master's. I'm going to go and I'm going to look into this, the STEM stuff, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. I don't know if anybody knows you. If you all remember, I'm not a math guy. They kicked me out of math when I was in high school. And I'm in a job involving counting things, which is always fun. Thankfully, Excel spreadsheets do math for me because I don't do math. But I thought, oh, let's go get this math degree, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to go for a new master's degree, and I'm going to go for some business analytics because I do like exploring all of the things. And so I found this program in St. Bonaventure's that was gonna provide the baseline for me, all this other stuff. And then I got a phone call, and they told me that my master's degree, while accredited, was not good enough to get me into their program because my bachelor's degree was not as accredited as they wanted it to be. Okay, well, that was a bit of a shock. So now I had to go back and reevaluate. I had to step back and redo like several of these things to figure out, okay, well, what do I do? Turns out I couldn't even get into most graduate programs, like graduate certificate programs, because of this bachelor's degree. So I decided to fix that. And so instead of going for a master's degree, I am now enrolled into a bachelor's program. Yes, even more self-inflicted than a master's degree program. I've decided to start back at the beginning. And, you know, so I stepped forward, and in January, I made that commitment and started a new bachelor's degree at Southern New Hampshire University. Now, as I look through all of these things, you know, I went through all of the stages of transition. I went through the denial, the resistance, the exploration, and then the commitment of taking the step. Because taking a big step in putting forth and starting, I mean, I didn't have to start at the very beginning, but I did have to go back. And they're putting me through pre-calculus and calculus and statistics. And God help me when I go into calculus and intro to scripting in this coming semester. Because not only am I doing math for the first time, I'm doing computer programming. I don't know computer programming, but this is what I'm going to learn how to do, right? But taking that transition from being, you know, coming home at the end of a long day at work, or even, you know, the way the last year has been, it's transitioning from my office to my kitchen table, right? So transitioning from my office to my kitchen table to go from one job to my second job, because I'm in full-time school, to doing that has been a huge change in my schedule. And on top of that, with all of the fitness things that I've been doing, and my days are pretty full. And that has been, while exhausting, what we find when you transition and you find something that you're going, okay, I needed this, while exhausting on the physical and mental aspect of it, to say the least, with regards to the change and the extra work that it comes, you find that transitioning to new things that you didn't realize that you needed can be exhilarating and can provide new life to what you thought was kind of your exhausting life, to provide a new direction and change. So all of those things, but one of the big things that you had to figure out, I had to explore my why. Why was I doing this? Why did I feel stuck? And what was causing me to feel stuck? And I think part of it was that I felt like I wasn't growing anymore. I wasn't learning as much as I wanted to. What was leading me down this path to transition from the guy that came home from work, may have gone to the gym and watched TV for the rest of the night? What was causing me to go down this? What was there some sort of trigger event? And I think the pandemic was a big trigger event for a lot of folks. I know it was for me on many aspects, from both my personal life with regards to being a student, for my health, in regards to, figuring out what I needed to do to get healthy, and learning to cook more. It's really easy when you're a single guy living in a little bitty apartment to order out every day, right? So believe me, I was. The Navy was, I wasn't out of standards, but I certainly was not in the best health of my life, and my, between cholesterol and everything else. So, all of those things. But I also think that I have to remember that it took me 9 months to kind of get to that point where I was ready to commit. So I think the other thing to realize when you're looking at transitioning in one portion of your life to another is that there's not necessarily a need to rush in some of these things, and to remember to take it at your own pace. And as I tell my service members all the time who are going through their physical transitions, that transition in any aspect of your life is a marathon or an ultra marathon, as I did this weekend, not a sprint. And we don't need to rush into anything when it comes to moving towards that change in our lives, because change is hard, and you don't need to make it harder by imposing arbitrary deadlines on yourself to making those transitions. And I'm going to transition to a different story here to kind of talk about how you might see this intertwined with a little bit of the 5 stages of grief. But a big portion of transition is also maybe realizing that you need to move from one portion of a life that you thought you enjoyed or did enjoy but don't any longer, and saying goodbye to that while you move into a new thing. I know for someone who's transitioned, a lot of times many of those people around you are going to lament the person that you were, and then come around to accepting the person that you are, realizing that there may not be a whole lot of change, but there's that tension of grief and transition. And so earlier this year in January, as we talked 2020, and we have to realize that really has extended all the way up until just recently. And in January, I realized that there's a time when you have to transition where you don't really want to, but you realize that you need to. And this is kind of where I think that grief and transition kind of intermingle with each other. Over the last year, so so I've, for a long time, since 2012, I ran a nonprofit called Sparta, largest military or transgender military advocacy organization. If you need a trans-military person, the press and the Congress and the military all know that they come to us. And from 2016 to 2019, I was the chairman of the board. And then from 2019 on, I'd been on the board as the treasurer, but I was still heavily involved in mentoring service members and talking to the DoD and advising members of Congress. But over the last year, I realized that my interactions with many of our members were not as good as I would like them to be. They were bringing me much more anxiety rather than joy. And I was definitely in a denial phase on needing to maybe change my role. So I think what caused and as I said, you got to look at what's your trigger event, right? And I think my trigger event was a service member who started a conversation with me and basically told me that I was doing more harm than good. And of course I got angry, right? That was really insulting. That I could be doing more harm than good. And I think they were both right and wrong. I don't think that I was necessarily harming myself or bringing harm than in the sense that I was really hurting them. I was definitely angry in the sense that I couldn't believe someone would accuse me of being a horrible advocate. But at the same time, realizing that maybe my advocacy, while good at the time that I did it, has changed because the audience has changed. Our service members were needing a different kind of advocacy. And so that was me going. So then I went into kind of that bargaining phase. Well, maybe I've got 6 months left. Maybe, who's going to take my place? I have no idea who's going to take my place. We got nobody to take my place. The whole reason that I'm still the treasurer is because nobody's going to take the treasurer's place, because nobody wants to deal with the money, right? That's everybody's biggest fear. Nobody wants to touch the money, right? So surely I need to stay around 6 more months. And then as you move through the two phases, you come to this kind of exploration, depression, and then the commitment phase before the acceptance phase. And I'm gonna say that I'm probably in the exploration, depression, commitment phase. Let's call it that. I have resigned. I'm no longer on the board. We've transitioned that position. And to be honest, I'm a little bit lost. And this is why I chose to talk about transition a little bit this time around, was because I'm in the midst of it. Leading Sparta was 10 years of my life and 10 years out of my 15-year career in the military, right? I'm a little bit wobbly. So to think about, okay, well, what do I do with my life now? Right now I have this thing, I think about, okay, well, I filled it with fitness and I filled it with school and I filled it with work, but am I really filling the void of Sparta, or am I trying, have I filled the void of what I was doing with my advocacy work, with all of these other things? And I don't think I have. I think I was doing all of those things on top of it. So I'm still feeling this giant hole in my life, similar to losing a piece of your life, right? so I have no idea what the future holds. I'm still doing advocacy work on behalf of Sparta. I'm just not in the leadership. And again, it's like taking a CEO out of the company and saying, okay, well, we don't need you anymore. And they didn't really say that, but I've taken a big step back. And as we move into things, I still say, as you figure out especially in a time when you realize that you need to transition or you need to move on to something new, you need to move on to a new job, or you need to maybe think about the types of relationships that are in your life that you want to hold on to, but realize that may or may not be a good place for you, because you've realized that. Are you holding on to it because it's what you know, or are you holding on to it because it's what you love? And I think that that's really important to think about, especially, I have talks with folks all the time about transitioning out of the military. And I think this is really good. This is a really good like primer for what I'm going to deal with when I finally decide to hang up the uniform, of realizing, the majority of my life has been involved in the uniform, and I've got to take a big step back and realize that but that's a lot of what I've been trying to do over this year, is to prepare myself so that I don't feel the need to fall on my face when I do decide to finally hang it up. And I think again, exploring your why, what is the trigger that is causing you to think about it. Sometimes you don't realize that you need to do it until you've seen that trigger event. And one of the best pieces of advice that I haven't taken yet, when it comes to figuring out these transitions in life, is to think about therapy. A 3-star admiral, 3 stars, been in the military 35 years, got out of the military, and for the next 9 months, his wife said he moped about while he figured out what was going on. And she goes, okay, you know what? It's time for you to, go get a therapist. And so he'll tell you that when you get out of the military, find yourself a therapist. And part of that is because, again, you need to kind of figure out what you want to do with your life, now that what you've been doing for the last 45 years is not an option anymore. The other thing that I've done through all of this is that I've reevaluated and set goals. So when you realize that you need a transition, you need to, again, change jobs, reevaluate your relationships, reevaluate your hobbies or things like that are big portions of your life, is to find goals that are not associated with those things. For 10 years, all I talked about was transgender people in the military, and focusing my life on a lot of that, and focusing my life on the military, right? So I have taken the time, the goals that I am setting now have nothing to do with either. And so that I can think about life that is not attached to things that are big portions of my current life, because I know that those things change. Simon Sinek, big leadership guy, talks about working hard for something that we don't care about is called stress, and working hard for something that we love is called passion. And I found that I had lost my passion for individual advocacy, partly because I have lost the bubble on realizing that how I am with things is not how the people that are currently serving need it. And it wasn't about me being bad at advocacy on that level. It was realizing that I am not meeting the needs of the current population, and realizing that other people needed to step into that role. So as we realize that this last year has taught us, we're constantly called to transform our lives, because maybe sometimes because we want to, sometimes because we need to, and sometimes because of forces that are beyond our control. The key is to take a moment and identify your why and realize that you need to transition. Once you can clearly identify the why you need to move forward with what transition or change or whatever you want to call it, once you identify why that needs to happen, you can really chart that path forward. And it is really important that you don't take transition on a whim, that you really do take the time to explore it and understand what needs to happen and to set those goals, because otherwise you may be transitioning a little bit longer than you thought you would be because you don't really have a plan for changing what needs to happen. So, but as we go forward and into the next week, I challenge you to think through anything that you might need to change in your life, or find that you've realized that maybe there's a trigger event that's got you thinking about making a change, and to really think about the why that needs to happen, and then think about what the plan is to make that work in a way that's not going to force you to move faster than maybe you should, and force you to move in a way, wait until it absolutely positively needs to happen, because then you're going to move a lot faster than you need to. So barring any questions or anything, I thank you for the opportunity to kind of share my life with you today, and I'll turn it back over to Doug or Kathy.